Okay, we are doing chapter 5, starts on page 151. Got a couple of objectives here. I'll let you read those, and then it goes into forming a group. This chapter really focuses on screening individuals to make a group and why it's so important to screen people and what to do in situations depending on where you're working or you're designing a group of like what happens when you can't. So you have like open groups that are people can come in and out all the time, and then you have closed group that the 10 people that you start with stay in the group until the group is finished. So it talks about some different types of groups and the important part of making sure that you understand the importance of screening when possible and what are some options you can kind of do for any concerns that could come up when you aren't able to actually screen people or permit people not to be in the group if they're not a good candidate. So it talks about when you are going to make and design your own group that you have to have like the rationale, like what's the purpose of this group? Who does it serve? What do you want to be the outcomes? What kind of considerations have you made? Is it reasonable within a reasonable limits, attainable? It's like kind of like a treatment plan, right? And how are you going to, like, what services are you going to provide, like what types of interventions, theories, and how will you evaluate if your group is being successful or not? And so it has a bunch of like questions on the bottom of page 153 and over to page 154 that you would like ask yourself when you're like designing your own group and developing it, what things you would want to take in. And then it gives you like an idea of like working within a system. So like if you were going to do like an addictions group, you would have to have your agency okay it, and the people that would be involved, you'd have to talk to your referral sources like probation and parole, the court system, things like that. How do you work with the mandated referrals, those types of things. So it talks about that when you're designing a group and you're implementing something for the community, whether it's in a school setting or a hospital setting or an agency setting, you do have to recognize that there's some political, diplomatic type things that you might have to take into account so that you don't sabotage yourself and not get to do your group. So sometimes you have to please other people to get what you want. Then it talks about on page 155, getting people, like how do you get people into your group? So some of your groups are going to be voluntary, some are going to be involuntary, but you have to make sure that whatever types of groups that you do, that you're using evidence-based practices. You'll have to have like a disclosure statement. So your informed consent, when you're going over that, it should really tell people everything that they need to know about the group. Like some of the questions on your thing here is like what methods of screening we use. So for example, if you were going to like a suicide survivors group, you might screen people for like where they are at in their recovery or where they're at in wanting to heal, what type of personality they are. All these things are very important because it can highly impact group dynamics. But then you could also have groups that are closed or open groups. Like if you're at a psychiatric hospital, you're going to have different people join your group every day. I did a VASAP group in Virginia for a couple of years, and one of the interesting things that they did about that is it was a 16-week process, and you had a different activity every week. So when you got to 16, you just started over again. So if somebody joined at 8, they would finish 16 and then do 1 through 7 to get their 16 weeks. So they didn't build on each other like a lot of your closed groups would build with like a beginning, a middle, and an end. They didn't, you could still see people like getting closer and bonding and becoming a cohort, but you didn't have as much of a structured beginning and end in those types of open groups. Obviously, the type of group that you have will depend on what type of members you have. So when you're writing all this up, you have to include all of the fees, what type of group it is, how you're going to screen, how you're going to evaluate, how you're going to do all this stuff. It has to be included in there. And so look on page 156 when it's talking about selection and processing, you really have to know your group composition, who's making up this group, what population, what age, what ethnicities. Do you want it to be similar group members? Do you want it to be diverse group members? How many can you handle? How often are they going to meet? For how many times? Where is the group going to be held? Is it an open group or a closed group? Like all those things are very important to know. And when you are trying to form that, then you also have to think about the fact that that may or may not be what your agency or them are okay with. So you may have to tweak it. And then you may have to have certain standards and guidelines in there too, depending on if you're trying to abide by a grant or try to abide by some regulation or even some type of transportation barriers into the thing. So you have to consider a whole lot. Some advantages of the group is you have to explain to people, like, why should we come there, right? Well, you'll gain a support system. You'll see that you can relate, your problems can relate to other people's that are experiencing very similar things. You can see different perceived ideas on the same experiences. You can see how people are dealing with it, or you can be of support to someone else. And so that is another way that we can easily talk about advantages. Some of the misconceptions about group are that group is for everybody, and that is not true. Group is not for everybody. Group is not for specific people that monopolize, or people that are too timid, or people that are overly vulnerable, people that are maybe looking to take advantage of other people. So there's a lot of reasons why you would not want certain people in a group. The goal of the group is for everyone to achieve closeness. That's not true. The goal of the group is the goal of the group. And it's not to tell people who they should be, or that they're right or wrong, or that to be so enmeshed that they don't lose their identity, or even that anything is fake. So it's very important for them to know that those are not true. Those are misconceptions. We use pre-group meetings and screenings for two different reasons. So you have screenings and then pre-group meetings. Screenings are where you get the chance to take in everybody that wants to be in your closed group or a group that you're forming. You get to like interview them, make sure they're a good fit, make sure they understand if they really want to join, ask questions. And then sometimes when you get your group together, you can have kind of like a orientation style session just to make sure before it actually gets started. And that would be like a pre-group meeting. But also in some settings like hospitals and places where it's a very open group, you can have those either with you or with you and a co-leader, or with you and a group member, sometimes just kind of filling out someone, because if somebody's not a good fit for the group, they need to be told that, and that is your job also, is if you don't think they should be in a group, or there's a reason why they should not attend the group, it is your job to tell them your concerns. So if someone was coming in and they were extremely vulnerable, you might say, like, I'm afraid that this could do more damage than good for you. I think that maybe an individual therapy would be better for you right now until you were a little bit farther along before you joined a group. You would have to tell them that information. Some other reasons that you would do a pre-group meeting is to just not make it so taboo or scary sounding, just demystify the whole perception of it. Um, uh, Allow people to come together, make group rules, ask questions about the groups, like any questions that they might have about how people are going to handle things that are frustrating. Like, how do you handle, like, what discussion do you want to talk about when people are upset with each other? When they get disappointed, or they get mad if somebody leaves the group, or somebody's not participating fully? Like, what types of frustrations can participants encounter, and talk about how those will be handled. Talk about the procedure of how it's going to look. Talk about empowerment to instill some faith in the group. And then obviously have them discuss some ground rules for confidentiality and subgrouping. You do not want subgrouping. Subgrouping is when, say you have a group of 10, 2 or 3 break off here, 3 or 4 break off here, and that you lose the cohesiveness of the group because they become more entwined with their smaller subgroups than the group as a whole. So that's one of the reasons why they say not to try to have too many people in a group, because the more people you have in the group, the more likely it is to subgroup. So if you just have like 5 or 6, it's really hard for them to subgroup as much, if that's possible. No matter what group you have, there's usually a payer source or someone overlooking it. And then just for yourself, so like when you're a clinician and you have a treatment plan, you evaluate that treatment plan if people are meeting their goals, if things are working. This is the same way. You have to have a way of evaluation. That could be an assessment, that could be a questionnaire, it could be selecting the goals. Somehow you have to be accountable for the outcomes of that group, and you have to do some type, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, you have to evaluate and assess if you're meeting the goals of that group. And you would want to know that too, because if you weren't, then you would need to tweak some stuff or figure out a different way if you're not meeting the goals of the group. Depending on where you work or what type of group you're leading, it's not uncommon to have a co-leader. The benefits of having a really good co-leader is that that's a shared responsibility. If something is going on in the group and you need to talk about it, you don't have to stop the group to handle an issue. The other person can continue with the group while the other leader goes and handles the issue, and that's always helpful to have that kind of backup. You want to make sure the lines of responsibility and who's doing what and how that's going to go, and your leadership styles are discussed very openly and upfront. So the co-leader and the leader, they need to be able to work together really well, obviously, because you don't want to have some kind of animosity when you're trying to lead the group and you're actually like one person's over here saying one thing and you're like disagreeing with each other. So you want to make sure that you plan together, that you are successful, and that you work really well together, and that you can feed off of each other in a positive way to support the group. There's a lot of times that whether it's working with a couple or a group, they suggest to always have like the opposite sex or something like that, and that just basically is like to counterpart like that you don't accidentally take. So if you have 2 clinicians, when you have a couple, that allows you to not accidentally side more with one's opinion over the other and have a bias. So it would work the same way in a group. If you have a good co-leader, it would allow you to like monitor each other for biases or concerns, or if somebody's a little more frustrating, that you're acting in a way that is appropriate. So that's it for chapter 5. And so that's the end of this module. Okay.